Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction course. My name is Molly Buss, and I'm the Community Relations Manager at the Earl E. Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And my role for today's webinar is to moderate the chat and also facilitate the Q&A at the end of the session. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick introduction of the Bakken Center for those that may not be familiar with our work. It is our vision to advance the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and communities through integrative health and healing. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have really strived to provide free resources and webinars to help you navigate these challenging times. And we need your help to continue to do this work. So if you're able to, please consider making a donation of any amount, and I will be sharing more information about how you can donate in the post-webinar email, so watch for that. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Marianne Johnson, Mindfulness and Wellbeing Instructor at the Bakken Center. Before I turn things over to Marianne, there's just a few logistical items I want to cover to help you navigate the webinar functions. Throughout the webinar, you're welcome to share your thoughts and comments via the chat box. And if you're comfortable and do want to share your responses with all attendees, please make sure to update the to field in the chat box to all panelists and attendees. And then just note that you have the opportunity to minimize the chat box during the presentation. And we invite for you to do that during the components that aren't interactive to help you stay present. And there's also a Q&A icon where you can submit your questions, and Marianne will answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the session. If you aren't able to find these icons, if you're on a laptop or computer, try hovering your mouse over the bottom of the webinar screen and they should pop up for you. We'll be sending out an email with a recording and lots of other mindfulness resources later today, so look for that. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Marianne now.
Thanks so much, Molly, and welcome everyone. Really happy to have you joining us today for this webinar. Here's a few things that I'd like to cover with you today. I'd like to provide a definition for mindfulness, at least the way that we frame it in teaching MBSR, talk about the research and possible benefits of mindfulness practice, talk a little bit about the history and evolution of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that was founded many years ago, over 35 years ago, by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And then I'm going to delve into the 8-week program, just at least an overview so that you know what it looks like and what it entails. As Molly said, we'll provide some time for questions as much as we can towards the close as well. And I'll provide an opportunity for us to have an experiential exercise, do a little brief mindfulness meditation. But speaking of mindfulness, it might be really nice right now for us to all arrive. So many of us are running from one thing to the next, even in the middle of COVID, if you're working from home, wherever you are right now. I really invite you to just let go of everything that's already been and is yet to come, and just arrive here now. The body is always in the present moment, so maybe using that as an instrument to feel your feet on the floor, taking a couple of deeper, fuller, satisfying in-breaths and out-breaths. And just remembering as best you can your intention to be here now. So thank you. That's our first arriving exercise, and that was nice for me too. So I'd like to get a sense, Mel and I both would, what brings you here today? Your interest in MBSR. So Molly's going to put these questions, so if you would, just let us know.
Thanks, Marianne. And I'll just quick go over as you're getting your votes in. So were you curious about mindfulness or MBSR? Looking for methods to reduce your stress? Do you already have a practice, or maybe you just want to join the webinar because it's free and wanted to learn more? Or if you have another reason, just put it in the chat for us. We'll just give people a couple more seconds here to get in their responses.
Wow.
So it seems like the bulk of people have gotten their responses. So I will end the poll now. So there was actually a tie between being curious about mindfulness and MBSR and looking for methods to reduce stress as the top answers. Both of those had 34%. And in a close second was they already have a meditation practice, but just wanted to learn a little bit more about the MBSR program. 4% said, hey, it's a free webinar, why not? And then 2% said other, and just looking at some of those responses. So already having a relationship with the Bakken Center and some of our free resources, attending your Stress Buster sessions, Marianne, and wanting to learn more due to that. And also struggling to have difficult conversations without getting really stressed. So looking for a tool for that.
Great. Thanks, Molly. It's really helpful that you went over those other comments too. Well, this is about what I anticipated when we were thinking about putting this program together. There's so many of us today that are experiencing escalated states of stress due to COVID-19 and just everything that's changing and rearranging in our lives right now. And many of us are looking for methods, approaches that we might use. And mindfulness and MBSR is clearly, as the name implies, stress reduction, is a program that research has shown can be very effective in that. So welcome, all of you with those interests. I'm glad you're here to journey through this webinar together. Those of you who already have a meditation practice and want to learn more about MBSR, I can personally say that I had a meditation practices for many years before I took MBSR, and I found it a really helpful, systematic program to help me anchor my practice. So maybe some of you will find that to be true. So at any rate, just really pleased to have you all here, and we're all here to learn and grow together. So I look forward to hearing a bit from you at the end too, with any questions you might have. We always like to say that we practice and teach mindfulness here at the center, and we frame it as an evidence-based practice that's been demonstrated through research. We are an academic institution, of course, to enhance well-being, increase resiliency, and reduce stress. We think it's so important, in fact, that we place it right smack dab in the middle of a 6-dimensional well-being model that our founder, Dr. Mary Jo Kreitzer, has developed. Some of you may be familiar with this model. If you're not, please visit our website. It's got lots of resources and information on that well-being model. But just simply said here, we believe mindfulness really falls right smack dab in the middle of that well-being model and can be integrated in every other area. So now I'd like to spend a minute here just right out of the gate to talk about, okay, well, what does mindfulness actually mean? In case you haven't noticed, it's rather ubiquitous these days. It's kind of everywhere. People are talking about it, but I want to ground it a little bit in terms of a definition that's it's a little adapted from what Jon Kabat-Zinn uses and used when he created MBSR, but basically it's an awareness of one's present moment experience. And one might say, well, aren't I always present? Aren't I always right here, right now? Well, most of us, if you really stop to think about it, realize that in any moment in time, and there's research that validates this as well, that over 50% of the time our minds are wandering, and they're generally wandering of one of two places, either to the future, pre-living something that hasn't even come into being, or reliving our past. The pre-living our future, or reliving our past can really cause some rumination, increased anxiety and depression sometimes. Now, there's nothing wrong with planning. I used to lead strategic planning sessions as a facilitator, and I like planning myself. But when our minds are always leaning into the what if world instead of being right here, right now, there's a disconnectedness, and also a lack of contentment, I would say, in our lives when we live predominantly in one of those two places. So mindfulness is something that can help us really be here now. A few other things I want to say about mindfulness before we go too much further. And that's to say that it's an innate capacity that I believe that we're all born with. But that given the busyness of our days, 24/7 connectivity, stressors, this chronic kind of partial attention that we can find ourselves falling into as default, we have to remember, uncover, bring to the surface this capacity we have to be present, to pay attention, as Jon Kabat-Zinn would often say, in a very particular way, in the present moment. So in order to do that, it can be really helpful for us to have some training. We want to get stronger muscles, we go to the gym. If we want to increase our ability to be attentive, to be mindful, there's a training of the mind, this MBSR training or other mindfulness trainings as well, that can really help enhance that. Now, something else I want to say about this before I dive any deeper into this definition is that I think it's really important to note that the underpinnings of the teachings of mindfulness are very, very old, thousands of years old, and many of them come from Eastern traditions. Also, if you look at most of the world's religions, you will find contemplative practices similar to mindfulness. I will say, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about this later, that the interest of Jon Kabat-Zinn when he saw so much suffering was to try to present these skills, this practice of mindfulness in such a way that it would be available broadly into many people. So he removed some of the religious trimmings here and made it more of a secular training. But let's remember where these roots come from as well. I've talked about the present moment experience. There are also attitudes that we cultivate. Some will say they just naturally grow as we practice mindfulness, but many say that we can also intentionally cultivate these attitudes, including curiosity and kindness. And Jon Kabat-Zinn always uses in his definition this term non-judgmental attitude. Many of you probably know that our brains here have a negativity bias, right? Its primary function is to scan the environment to see what's around us that might not be working, what's missing, so that we can focus on that. Our human survival is actually based on that. You wouldn't be listening to this now, and I wouldn't be speaking to you now had our ancestors not been hardwired to perceive threats so that we could survive. The capacity of our mind, our hearts, our bodies is so much bigger than that, though. So with mindfulness, we expand our ability to broaden our perspective, to actually be grounded in the here and now, less reactive, less of a tendency that many of us have to respond with an autopilot reactivity. I also love that quote on the bottom that you see there of Jon's, that he says, mindfulness could have been translated as heartfulness, as in ancient Asian languages, mind and heart mean the same thing. So it's an integrative practice. Now, speaking of attitudes, this is one of my favorite quotes of Jon Kabat-Zinn's about this aspect of attitude and developing and honing that, and what a critical part that it can be of our practice. It serves to counter, if you will, our practice of mindfulness, that negativity bias that's inherent in so many of us. The other thing I'll mention is that when you take MBSR, you will learn, or you can Google it after this, Jon started out teaching that there were 7 attitudinal aspects of mindfulness. And later in his training, he added 2 more. I believe it was gratitude and generosity as aspects of this. So attitude is one aspect. And when many people talk about mindfulness, they also add intentionality, cultivating an intention as best we can to be present in our lives. The second attribute that's often talked about in teaching mindfulness and research as well is attention. Learning how to pay attention, knowing how easy it is for all our minds to wander, and how resourceful it can be for us to be here and now. We learn to cultivate attention. The third aspect would be that of attitudes, and that countering, if you will, that negativity bias. I also like to talk about mindfulness as being other-oriented. Someone once told me many years ago, I've been practicing mindfulness for over probably close to 30 years. I have to add that up there for a moment. But when I first started meditating, I remember somebody telling me, oh, that's that navel gazing stuff, like it's really introspective and that's all that it's about. Oh, I have found it over the years to be so different than that. It's really allowed me to expand my repertoire, if you will, of being able to be really available and resourceful to those I care about. Someone talked about their reason for taking this was to learn how to be maybe less reactive and more present with others, having difficult conversations. Many of us are facing some of those difficult conversations right now, given the political climate. And I will just say that prior to teaching mindfulness full-time, I was a mediator. And I thought the single most important skill I had in my life was actually my mindfulness practice. It allowed me to note when I was feeling reactive and take a few breaths and come home to this innate capacity I had to be a bit more balanced and to be compassionate towards myself and others. So when we're mindful, we oftentimes are able to see and respond to others with a sense of greater sensitivity and understanding, because our practice is from the inside out. When we can give that to ourselves, then we can be more resourceful to others. So some of you may have noticed that mindfulness, as I said earlier, is rather ubiquitous. This is actually from the cover of Time magazine in 2014, but mindfulness has been on the cover of Scientific American Journal and many, many magazines and contemporary media. People talk about it all the time. Here's some stats that I just pulled up recently. According to the CDC, meditation is now the fastest growing healing trend in America. Number of meditators tripling since 2012 to 2017. Pew Research there tells us that 40% of Americans say they meditate at least weekly, across all religious groups, by the way. And 2015, JAMA said that 79% of medical schools are offering this. And certainly here at the University of Minnesota and through the center, we have a real commitment to working with healthcare professionals, teaching them well-being and mindfulness. So in alignment with those stats as well. But I think it's really important to point out that this interest in mindfulness didn't just happen through, it's not like a fad that just kind of popped out of nowhere. I think there's a direct correlation. And as a matter of fact, there used to be a chart, but I couldn't find it for today, but I'll tell you that you can see the number of web searches increasing with the word mindfulness, with the term mindfulness, in direct correlation to the increase in research as well. So that's an interesting thing to look at. It's not just a trend. I think that people's interests have also been perked because many people report anecdotally having found something that really worked. It helped them reduce their stress, enhance their resiliency, and an overall sense of well-being. So here's where we can see that. And I'm just going to walk you through this timeline just briefly here. Jon Kabat-Zinn actually started the MBSR program in 1979 at the University of Massachusetts, not even on this chart yet. And he started it, as I said, out of this desire to really deal with, he was a professor at the medical school at University of Massachusetts, and he was concerned about the people that he felt were falling between the crack, an estimate of about 20% of people that left medical care, sometimes with chronic pain and unable to deal with them. One of his central inspirations for starting teaching a class in mindfulness, and he added a little bit of yoga, was to really alleviate people's suffering and to deal with pain. So that started in 1979. And 1991, again, we're not even on the chart yet, he wrote a book that some of you may have read called Full Catastrophe Living, documenting the full 8-week program, something some of you can read if you want to go more in depth with that. And then in 1993, Bill Moyers had a special on PBS, and it was called Healing from Within, and he was looking at integrative approaches. And he brought on Jon Kabat-Zinn. I think it was the first or one of the first parts of this multi-series PBS special that he did. And it fit, Bill Moyers said, because Jon Kabat-Zinn is famous for saying something like, there's always far more right with us than there could ever be wrong, and how important it is to not focus on our pathology, but to focus on our innate inner goodness. So with that in mind, then in the 80s, the mindfulness program, Mindfulness-Based Stress Program, was introduced fully as a center at the University of Massachusetts, and then it went on to grow. And I'm just going to fast forward you moving up that at the University of Minnesota, if you look at 2005, that's about when we started our program here. So it's not new to us. We didn't jump on a fad. We've been very interested in mindfulness and the MBSR program for many, many years here. I'll say in 2015, we had the pleasure of, I think it was the second at least visit of Jon Kabat-Zinn here at the center, and we had sold out crowds at Northrop, filled it to capacity, as well as learning and retreat sessions that Jon did for us when he was here during that period of time. So I'll just go on to say that now, if you look at present day, this is 2017 research, but today, there are thousands of centers around the world actually now, and people who have been trained in MBSR through the University of Massachusetts, more recently Brown University and many other places. San Diego has a program as well, University of California in San Diego, training people to teach this program. Now, when we look at the research, I just want to say a few things first about the program, and just to say that the program that Jon developed is an experiential, from the inside out, 8-week program that is really rigorous. I'm not going to say that it's not. It's a commitment, but it's really based on a rich community learning, online or in person. It's intensive, it's systematic, it's comprehensive. By the time you leave the program, you've learned a lifelong skill, a lifelong practice. I didn't bring along antidotes. I don't need to do that, and testimonials to this program, but I will just tell you that in my own life and many others, I know it's really made a difference. Just a little statement there about who teaches here at the university, and anyone who teaches MBSR has to be trained in order to say that. So it's a good, solid training there. I've talked about the research studies. You see that here that we've done. And then I end this here, the fourth bullet point you'll see on the screen right now, is that research on MBSR training over the past 32 years consistently demonstrates positive outcomes, and you see many of them listed here. I think it's really important, however, that we don't look at MBSR as a panacea. It fixes everything, because sometimes I worry about that when people talk about mindfulness and MBSR, it comes across that way. There is some pretty solid evidence, though, for the effectiveness of mindfulness in 3 particular areas that I do want to talk about, and that kind of summarizes some of that Brown research. Reductions in anxiety, stress, and depression have been demonstrated through this practice of mindfulness and through the pre and post MBSR programs. Pain, especially in the emotional and cognitive dimensions, what we tell ourselves about the pain, we can begin to separate ourselves a little bit from that. We don't have a magic wand where we can reduce stress, take away all the stressors in your life, or we can take away pain in your life. But what we can provide is a way of dealing with the stressors and with pain in our lives that can perhaps be really, really important to us, allows us to stand back, offer ourselves some compassion for this human condition and the inevitable difficulties and sufferings that we all face as human beings. And then overall health and well-being really falls into that. Anecdotally and through our research found people report having an increased sense of quality of life, increased sleeping, coping, and empathy. Cautionary notes, the researchers that I work with will tell us that this field of mindfulness research, although you saw that chart, it's still young and evolving. So we're learning and growing, and there are some unknowns. And some of our results are indicative rather than definitive. But in terms of the evidence we do have, I would say these are 3 areas that we can feel pretty good talking about now in terms of demonstrated through research. Also, neuroscience has done quite a bit of contributions to the study of mindfulness, and through looking at the brain through MRI scans and other means, they've seen actual changes in the brain, and that practice over time can, through neuroplasticity, really have positive impact on attention, memory, emotional regulation, and also perhaps some of the more fascinating findings for me early on were the sense that the amygdala, which is the more primitive part of our brain that gets activated when we're under stress, we find that there can be less activity in the amygdala, less reactivity of that amygdala with a practice of mindfulness over time, and more access, let me say, to the prefrontal cortex, which is our area of executive functioning, making good decisions, remembering those active listening skills, all the rest of that. So more access to that when we meditate, and less reactive amygdala, less reaction to stress. And a particular area of interest to me over past many years, I've been working in mindful leadership and bringing mindfulness to work. We have a course here at the center, which is Mindfulness at Work, an online program. And there is some interesting research now on the functional domains that get impacted through the practice of mindfulness. You see them here now, leading to enhanced performance, relationships, and well-being. Emotional intelligence is built along with enhanced stress response as well. Now, I talked about mindfulness and MBSR not being a panacea. I also think it's important that we note that there can be some possible contraindications to practicing mindfulness and meditation, and I like to bring them up. It's infrequent that these things can happen, but they can, because when we're practicing mindfulness, we're increasing our awareness of what's present. So we're able to see and be with what's here. And that can really heighten our sense of all emotions being felt more strongly as we pay closer attention to our experience. So if you've had a recent loss in your life, a death of someone who is very close to you and you're grieving, or an active addiction that you're dealing with that's gone untreated, it can be not necessarily the right time for you to take an intensive training in mindfulness. As a mindfulness teacher once told me, this might be the time in your life to seek out social support and nurturance in your life and take that training a little bit further down the line. Also, if you have active PTSD or untreated serious mental health issues, such as bipolar, it can be challenging. Now, there are always exceptions to any of these. As a matter of fact, I was involved in a research project looking at PTSD in veterans, and it had very positive results. But it's really important that if you ever have any concerns, any of these things listed here, that you simply speak to your MBSR instructor. We're all trained to be able to understand that and to know what it's like to work with trauma. And so we can guide you through that at any point during the course. If you have difficulties, we can be of assistance to you. And we can also talk to you right out of the gate to say, is this a course appropriate for you at this time? So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about, what does it actually look like, this mindfulness meditation? Because if mindfulness is this innate capacity that we all have that I mentioned earlier, mindfulness meditation is one way that we can grow and enhance that muscle of mindfulness, if you will. And so here's a process model that I like to talk about. Usually when we're meditating, we find an object to pay attention to. The breath is a very common one because the breath and our body are always in the present moment. What a great anchor. Most of you who have been meditating can probably testify to this. If I could see you, you could raise your hands. But when we're meditating, oftentimes because of that, the propensity of our mind to wander, seek out the novel, it gets distracted. And when it gets distracted, we can lose focus and get carried into a whole feature-length film or some sort of narrative. When we notice that, we can normalize that by saying it happens to all of us. And the practice of mindfulness, the way certainly we teach it in MBSR, is that we're not trying to bliss out or get rid of our thoughts. We don't have that magic wand that's going to reduce stress. But what we do learn is how to work with our thoughts differently. We begin to see them more objectively and to just let them go as best we can. Sometimes the metaphor is like a cloud passing in the sky. And then we bring our attention back, we escort it to get back to the breath or the body, and we begin again. We regain focus. It doesn't matter how many times our minds wander. As a matter of fact, each time we can see that without judging ourselves harshly or getting captured by the thought and we just come back, that's what builds the muscle of mindfulness. And I think a lot of times beginning meditators don't understand that and they can feel defeated. And again, a good mindfulness teacher can help you understand and work with that. That's part of the process that we teach in MBSR. Now, being mindful is also more than meditation. What I just talked about was a formal practice. An informal practice has been found also to enhance states of mindfulness that can eventually lead to traits of mindfulness. I have a mindfulness teacher who says many moments, many times a day can build that muscle of mindfulness. And when we talk about everyday practices, that can include things like walking. Many of us right now through COVID are finding the joys of walking outside, and we can bring mindful awareness to feeling our feet on the ground or listening to the birds singing as we walk. Present moment awareness, mindful yoga, running, exercise, prior to answering a phone call, taking a breath. Oh yeah, I know I really want to be all hands on deck here. Let me take a breath. Eating mindfully, you see many of them here. Even reading to a child can be really helpful to bring our mindful attention to be present to your children. All right, I wanted to leave, and we've got a couple minutes here where I can do this, so that's great. Before we move into Q&A and things, I'd really like to just take a moment to practice some mindfulness with you, if that's okay. We don't have a lot of time to do it. It'll be a sampling, a brief one. But let's just settle in now, all of us. I invite you to do this if you'd like, to a comfortable seated position. Maybe placing both feet on the floor if that feels right for you, letting your hands just rest comfortably, realigning yourself so that you're comfortable. In mindfulness, we work with finding a posture in the body that's both comfortable and at ease and also allows us to be wakeful. And if you'd like, keeping your eyes just a soft gaze, both eyes open, or if you'd prefer, just gently closing your eyes. And then just becoming aware now of the fact that you're sitting here now. And noticing what it feels like to be sitting here from the inside out. Maybe gently noticing the feel, the weight of the feet in contact with the floor, actually being held by the earth itself. Maybe noticing a sense of temperature in the body, a warmth or a coolness. Being aware of what it feels like to have the hands rest right now. Maybe noticing the feel of the fingertips, the palms of the hands. The weight of the body resting in the chair now. The fact that your body's being supported and held by the chair. Noticing gravity. And then when you're ready, if you like, turning your attention to an awareness of the body breathing without having to manipulate the breath in any way. Change it, control it. This body of ours, this breath of ours, it knows just how to breathe. So just being aware of the felt sense of the in-breath, slight rising, and noticing the natural letting go of the out-breath. And just very gently now, aiming and sustaining your attention on the feel of the breath in the body. Maybe a sense of the whole body breathing. Or maybe you feel the breath in the belly or the nostrils or the chest. But just aiming and sustaining your attention there with the breath and riding its waves. And you noticed your attention may have wandered, just gently, without judgment, with some kindness. Come home again to the breath and just begin again, fresh and new. And we'll bring this brief meditation exercise to a close now. So if you'd like, taking in a deep, full, satisfying in-breath and out-breath. Feeling your feet on the floor. Gently opening your eyes if they've been closed. Maybe looking around the room or doing a little stretch. Thank you for joining me on that meditation. If you'd like, maybe in the chat, putting in a word, a phrase of what you noticed. And you can't flunk mindfulness, so whatever showed up for you, just a word or a phrase.
People are starting to share their responses. So some of the words that I'm seeing are grateful, peace, calmness, focused, feeling energized, connected, supported. So those are some of the phrases in the chat.
So thank you, Molly. One of the things that we do, of course, or I shouldn't say of course, but that happens when we practice mindfulness, and this regulation of the breath can get us in touch with the other aspect of our central nervous system, the parasympathetic. And so that can be very empowering. It's one of the reasons that I like to teach mindfulness, is because I found it so empowering in my own life as a self-regulation tool sometimes, if you will. So this ability to engage our parasympathetic nervous system and feel a sense of calm. My guess is there are probably some of you who also noticed a lot of distracted thoughts, maybe a little pain in the body. That's also really normal and natural too. So we come slow and easy to this process of learning mindfulness. And speaking of that, here's a quote that I like to talk about, and then I'm going to just take a moment to walk you through the MBSR program. But Rollo May has a modification of a famous Viktor Frankl quote that I love to talk about with mindfulness. Freedom, you could replace that word with mindfulness, is the ability to pause between stimulus and response, and in the pause to choose, taking a breath, collecting ourselves, understanding our human tendencies to react, and instead giving ourselves a momentary pause to come home, and how powerful that can be. So here's what the MBSR online and on-site program looks like. Same curriculum. And we have a 1-hour orientation that we really encourage you to attend so that you can learn the nuts and bolts of what we're going to do. There's 8 weekly sessions. The first and last class meet for 3 hours. Don't worry, when it's online, we give you some breaks. And then the others are 2.5 hours, again, with some breaks. There's an all-day retreat. Yes, we do it online too, and it's a beautiful experience. A cornerstone of MBSR is really building a strong learning community, and we're able to do that online. Some of you have probably experienced that. We use Zoom. It works really well for us. And then there's daily practice. In between weekly sessions, there's formal meditations and informal everyday mindfulness practices so you can bring it to life. And then the weekly sessions also include a guided instruction in mindful meditation like I just did, some gentle stretching and mindful yoga. Same curriculum that Jon created all those years ago has just been ever so slightly adapted. And each teacher will, of course, bring their own little approach to it, but it's a standard curriculum. Lots of discussion and home practice. So it's really a comprehensive program. With us, you'll get a manual, and you'll also get links to regular guided meditations that the instructors will tell you about each week. There's a different one. So Molly, I think we probably have a couple minutes for some questions here, and I'd love to take some. So
Yeah, definitely. And correct me if I'm wrong for the person that submitted this question, if you have to clarify, but they were wondering about the difference between kind of some of the contraindications to MBSR and how MBSR can also aid in emotional regulation.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, that's why I said, you know, I've had people come to me that are working. As a matter of fact, many psychiatrists and therapists recommend students take MBSR. And when those students talk to us at the beginning of class and tell us what they're dealing with, we'll sometimes modify some of the guidance and instructions as needed. Oftentimes they don't need it at all, because mindfulness really has been shown to enhance our ability to regulate our emotions and to broaden our ability to be resourceful and to understand the nature of emotions are that they come and go, and that we don't have to over-identify either with our thoughts or our emotions. So we develop new resources and skills, you're right, to deal with those emotions. So I would say if you have any concerns about whether or not a mindfulness program is appropriate for you, talk to your instructor. We're trained in being able to help you navigate some of that, both in the class itself and deciding whether or not it's appropriate up front.
Great. Can you explain a little bit more about whole body breathing and why it is important to feel that during the practices?
Yeah, I want to say that many of us experience the breath in many different regions. So sometimes you'll say, the instructor teaching meditation will say, focus with the breath right here in your nose. And some of you will go, I don't feel the breath there. Others will feel it in the chest, some in the belly. Or it's wherever you have easiest access to it sometimes that it can serve as an anchor for your awareness and just kind of help you focus your concentration and attention. For some people, I gave a cue here when I was guiding that brief meditation that you could explore if you wanted, if it worked for you, a sense of whole body breathing, meaning a sense, sometimes when you're sitting like right now, you just might notice that you feel a slight expansion and contraction, lifting and falling throughout the body. Some people don't at all. The only place they feel the breath is at their nostril. So when you take MBSR classes, your instructor will instruct you on, hey, let's experiment with where you notice the breath, for example, most vividly in the body, and work with that as an anchor of breath. By the way, there are many other anchors as well, because some people have a hard time accessing the breath in the body, and so we'll provide you with other anchors as well. And throughout the MBSR curriculum, we're building each week, exploring and broadening our base of anchors and meditation experiences.
Great. We have time for one more question, I think, and then we'll just chat briefly
Sure.
about some of our other mindfulness programming. So what are effective mindfulness practices for compassion, fatigue, or vicarious trauma? And could this be applied in a team setting? So not a simple question, but.
Yeah, that's a big question. And whoever that person is, I'd be happy to talk to them after this too. You know, you could email me. But I will just tell you that I think, healthcare providers right now, my heart goes out to them and with such gratitude. Any compassion practices, I'm going to recommend Kristen Neff has written a book on self-compassion. She has a powerhouse of a website with free guided self-compassion meditations. Very, very good resource I would suggest for any of you. Also, we have a COVID website where we list some guided meditations and resources for you as well. And I would suggest that you go there. I also would suggest the power of a few moments at the beginning of a meeting when you're coming together, or before work when people are congregating that are healthcare professionals. Even just a few 3 minutes, putting your hands on your heart is a technique actually that many people teach. And maybe just offering yourself some compassionate phrases can be really, really helpful during this period of time. Mindfulness practices in and of themselves also can be really helpful for enhancing a sense of self-compassion and self-care as well.
Great. Well, Marianne, if you don't mind advancing the next slide.
Sure.
So as Marianne, shared quite a bit about our mindfulness-based stress reduction program. We do have some other mindfulness programming options at the center as well that I wanted to highlight, and all of these would be great options if you want to develop or deepen a personal mindfulness practice. And due to the pandemic, we are offering all of our courses online, and the fall courses begin in September and October. And just wanted to note that recently I put this in the chat as well, but we have implemented pay what you can pricing or sliding scale pricing in order to make these programmings accessible to a broader community. And we're really excited about that. So as Marianne shared, mindfulness-based stress reduction is kind of, the gold standard program. If you're ready to make that commitment, it's a really great option. If you're looking for something that's maybe more applicable to your professional life, we have a great course, Mindfulness at Work, and that is self-paced. And so you can do it 10 minutes in the morning, finish the course whenever is workable for you throughout the week, and is really focused on applied mindfulness in the workplace. So a great opportunity for professional development. And then finally, we have the Introduction to Mindfulness course, which is 4 weeks, an hour and a half per week, and that will also be offered online. And that's a good option if you're just kind of wanting to get your feet wet and you're not sure if you're ready to commit to MBSR quite yet. If you're thinking you want to do both programs, Intro would probably be a great place to start off, and then kind of graduate to MBSR. And then Marianne, next slide, please, if you don't mind. And then we do also offer free weekly mindfulness and meditation sessions that incorporate some gentle movement as well, and those are led by Marianne. And so they're on Tuesdays through August 25th, and then we're going to move to Mondays at noon starting August 31st. And so that's another great way to just have a consistent practice, learn some new skills, etc. And then finally, I had linked to the chat, in the chat a couple of times to our Taking Charge website, but that is just a wealth of information, both on mindfulness and other well-being topics. So we will send out all this information via email. I know it was a lot in a short amount of time, so watch for that. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think that that's all the time we have for today, and watch for the post-webinar email. We'll send the recording. We'll send a select number of the PowerPoint slides and a whole bunch of resources on mindfulness.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.